The Boeing 777 shuddered through turbulence 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, its cabin filled with the desperate, heart-wrenching wails of a 6-month-old baby that had been crying for 2 hours and 17 minutes straight. The piercing screams echoed off the curved walls of the aircraft, creating a symphony of distress that seemed to penetrate every passenger's soul. Flight attendants moved frantically up and down the aisles, their professional smiles strained to the breaking point as they fielded increasingly hostile complaints from exhausted travelers. The captain had already announced twice over the intercom that they were experiencing some minor turbulence, but everyone knew the real storm was happening inside the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their cramped seats, some pressing noise-cancelling headphones tighter against their ears, others shooting irritated and accusatory glances toward the first-class section where the piercing screams originated with relentless intensity. The businessman in seat 14C had already demanded to speak to a supervisor, threatening to sue the airline for emotional distress. A young mother, traveling alone with her own toddler, looked ready to burst into tears herself. Overwhelmed by the sympathetic crying her well-behaved 2-year-old had started in response to the infant's distress. What nobody on that airplane expected, what none of the 247 passengers and crew members could have possibly predicted, was that the solution to this airborne nightmare would come from seat 32B, where a 12-year-old boy wearing worn sneakers held together with duct tape and a faded Marvel t-shirt with a small hole near the left shoulder was about to change everyone's perspective on human compassion, social barriers, and the profound power of unexpected kindness. If this incredible true story touches your heart the way it touched everyone who witnessed it firsthand, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that miracles happen every single day in the most ordinary places. Victoria Elizabeth Ashworth clutched her baby daughter Emma Grace against her chest, her perfectly manicured nails now chipped and broken from hours of desperate attempts to calm the inconsolable infant. The chief executive officer of Ashworth Industries, a tech empire worth over $3.2 billion, had flown first class to every continent, closed multi-million-dollar deals in glass-walled Tokyo boardrooms while jet-lagged and exhausted, commanded respect from world leaders and Fortune 500 executives, and built her company from a small startup in her garage to a global powerhouse that employed over 15,000 people worldwide. She had given keynote speeches to audiences of thousands, negotiated hostile takeovers with ice-cold precision, and maintained her composure during the most stressful board meetings where millions of dollars hung on every decision. But here, trapped in this metal tube, hurtling through the sky at 550 miles per hour, surrounded by increasingly hostile strangers, she felt utterly, completely, devastatingly helpless. Emma's tiny face was red and blotchy from crying, her delicate features contorted in distress, her miniature fists waving frantically through the air as she screamed with the raw, primal intensity that only babies possess when something is fundamentally wrong with their world. Victoria's $1,500 silk Hermes blouse was stained with spit-up, formula, and tears, both her daughter's and her own, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled and desperate. Her platinum blonde hair, normally styled to perfection, hung in limp strands around her face, and her designer makeup had long since smeared and run. She could feel the hostile stares burning into her back from economy class, whispers of, "Rich people think they can do whatever they want, and some people shouldn't be allowed to travel with babies," and "typical entitled first-class passenger ruining everyone else's flight," cutting through her heart like serrated knives. Every harsh word felt like a physical blow, because deep down beneath all her success and wealth and carefully constructed confidence, Victoria was terrified that they might be right, that she was failing at the most important job she had ever undertaken, that all her business acumen meant nothing when it came to understanding what her own child needed. Marcus Antonio Rivera pressed his thin face against the small airplane window, watching cotton ball clouds drift past against the endless expanse of deep blue sky that seemed to stretch into infinity. At 12 years old, he had already learned through hard experience that sometimes the most beautiful and meaningful things in life exist in the quiet spaces between destinations, in the moments of transition when you're neither where you've been nor where you're going. His grandmother, Sofia Maria Rivera, sat beside him in the middle seat, her weathered hands folded carefully in her lap, rosary beads with their worn wooden crosses wrapped around her arthritis-swollen fingers as she whispered silent prayers in rapid Spanish. They were flying from their cramped two-bedroom apartment in a rundown section of Queens, New York, to visit his dying grandfather in San Juan, Puerto Rico, a trip that had taken them 2 full years to save for, sacrificing everything from birthday presents to new clothes to occasional restaurant meals. Marcus wore his only pair of jeans, the ones with patches sewn carefully over the holes by his grandmother's patient hands, and his favorite superhero shirt, the one his mother Elena had bought him from a clearance rack at Walmart just 3 months before she passed away from stage 4 breast cancer that had ravaged her body despite her fierce determination to live for her son. His father Miguel worked brutal double shifts at a warehouse in Long Island City, loading and unloading trucks from 4 in the morning until midnight 6 days a week, his hands permanently stained with grease and his back constantly aching just to keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. This single airplane ticket represented months of sacrifice that most people couldn't imagine. Skipped meals when the choice was between groceries and rent, unpaid bills that accumulated like storm clouds, and countless nights when his grandmother chose between her heart medication and keeping the electricity turned on. But Marcus had never seen his beloved abuela cry the way she did when they received the phone call about Abuelo's rapidly deteriorating condition, her strong voice breaking as she learned that the man who had raised her children and taught her grandchildren might not have many days left, so he knew without question that this journey was worth everything they had given up, and more. The baby's cries intensified to an almost unbearable pitch as the plane hit another patch of rough turbulence that made the cabin lights flicker ominously, and Marcus watched with growing concern as passengers throughout the aircraft began to lose their patience entirely and show their worst human instincts. A heavy-set businessman in an expensive navy suit, sitting 3 rows ahead, muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear about inconsiderate parents who have no business flying with screaming brats, while typing aggressively on his top-of-the-line laptop, each keystroke punctuated with barely contained fury. A young mother traveling with her own toddler, who had been fighting to keep her 2-year-old son calm and quiet, shot disapproving looks and whispered harsh comments toward first class, clearly frustrated that her well-behaved child was being overshadowed by the chaos and that other passengers were giving her hostile looks as if she might be the next parent to lose control. An elderly couple in their 70s, who had been looking forward to their anniversary trip to Europe, sat rigid in their seats with expressions of pure disgust, the woman covering her ears dramatically while her husband shook his head and muttered about how people today have no consideration for others. The flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Janet Rodriguez, who had been flying for 15 years and had seen every possible scenario from medical emergencies to unruly passengers to weather delays, approached Victoria's seat for the 4th time in an hour, her professional smile strained but still genuine as she tried to think of something, anything that might help. She had brought warmed formula, fresh diapers, soft blankets, colorful toys, and even tried dimming the lights in first class, but nothing seemed to work. Janet had raised 3 children of her own and helped countless passengers with crying babies over the years, but there was something different about this situation that she couldn't quite identify. The baby wasn't hungry. She had been changed multiple times. She didn't seem to be in physical pain, and all the usual tricks that worked for most infants were completely ineffective. Sometimes Janet knew from years of experience and from raising her own kids, babies just need something that money can't buy, something that comes from the heart rather than from a store or a manual or a pediatrician's advice. Victoria's voice cracked with desperation as she apologized profusely for the fourth time, explaining through her tears that Emma had been a perfect traveler on every other flight they had taken together, that she had flown from New York to Los Angeles 6 times without a single problem, that she didn't understand what was happening or what had changed or what she was doing wrong. The shame and humiliation in her red-rimmed eyes was unmistakable and heartbreaking. The look of a woman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, but was being defeated by her 6-month-old daughter's inconsolable tears and her own inadequacy as a mother. Marcus had been listening to the baby cry for over 2 hours now, and something deep in his chest ached and twisted every time those desperate little screams pierced through the airplane's constant mechanical drone. The sound reminded him painfully of his own baby cousin Maria, who used to cry just like that when she was teething, and of the long nights when his mother was sick and in pain, but still tried to comfort him when he had nightmares about losing her. His grandmother had told him countless stories about babies back in their neighborhood in San Juan, how the old women, with their ancient wisdom, could calm any crying child with traditional songs and gentle touches passed down through generations of mothers and grandmothers, melodies that carried the weight of history and the power of unconditional love. She had sung those same haunting lullabies to Marcus during the darkest nights after his mother's death, when nightmares about hospitals and machines and the smell of disinfectant kept him awake and terrified, her weathered voice wrapping around his fears and grief like a warm blanket that made the world feel safe again. The songs were in Spanish, filled with words about angels and protection and love that never dies, and they had the power to quiet even the most troubled heart. Without asking permission from his grandmother or thinking about the consequences, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt with trembling fingers and stood up in the narrow aisle, his thin legs unsteady from sitting for so long. Sophia reached for his arm with concern, her dark eyes questioning what he planned to do, but he whispered softly in Spanish that he just wanted to help, that maybe he could try something that might work. The flight attendant, Janet, noticed the young boy walking purposefully up the aisle toward first class and moved quickly to redirect him back to his seat, following airline protocol and safety regulations that prohibited passengers from moving around the cabin during turbulence. But something in Marcus's determined expression, something in the way his young face showed not annoyance or irritation like the other passengers, but genuine concern and compassion, made her pause and reconsider. Marcus had the kind of face that adults instinctively trusted, open and honest, with large brown eyes that seemed much older than his 12 years, eyes that had witnessed profound loss and devastating grief, but had somehow chosen to remain kind and hopeful and believing in the goodness of people. Victoria looked up through her tears and exhaustion as she noticed a small figure approaching her seat, and her first reaction was defensive wariness because she expected another complaint or harsh comment about her crying baby. But instead of an angry adult passenger, she saw a boy who couldn't be older than 12 or 13, wearing clothes that were obviously second-hand but clean and carefully maintained, standing in the aisle with his hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of his faded t-shirt. His dark hair was neatly combed despite the long flight, and his expression showed none of the hostility or impatience she had been receiving from other passengers for the past 2 hours. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, his words accented with the musical cadence of Spanish, but perfectly clear in English, asking politely if he could try something his grandmother had taught him, something that might help calm the baby. Victoria's first instinct was to say no, because she didn't know this child, didn't know what he might do, didn't know if it was safe or appropriate, and she was already overwhelmed with anxiety about being judged by strangers. Her business training had taught her to be cautious, to protect herself and her assets, to never show vulnerability to people she didn't know and trust completely. But something about Marcus's earnest expression, something in the way he looked at Emma with genuine concern and empathy rather than annoyance or disgust, something in his young voice that carried notes of wisdom and experience beyond his years, made her hesitate and then slowly nod her consent. Marcus asked gently if he could hold the baby, and the entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its collective breath in anticipation and disbelief. This wasn't protocol, wasn't safe according to airline regulations, wasn't appropriate by any normal social standards. A strange child asking to hold a billionaire's infant daughter. But nothing else had worked. No amount of money or expertise or professional help had been able to calm Emma's distress, and Victoria found herself carefully transferring her precious daughter into Marcus's thin but surprisingly confident arms. The baby continued crying at first, her tiny body rigid with distress, but Marcus didn't seem discouraged or overwhelmed by the responsibility. Instead, he adjusted his hold with the natural instinct of someone who had helped care for younger children, supporting Emma's head properly and holding her close to his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat. Then he began to hum, so softly at first that only Victoria could hear the melody. A tune that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul and carry with it the weight of generations of love and comfort. The humming grew gradually louder, and other passengers throughout the cabin began to notice something extraordinary and unprecedented happening in the first-class section. Marcus was singing a Spanish lullaby, the same one his grandmother had sung to him countless nights when grief felt too heavy for his small shoulders to bear, when the absence of his mother seemed like a physical wound that would never heal. His voice was clear and sweet, despite his young age, carrying a melody that seemed to weave through the airplane cabin like invisible threads, connecting every person present to something larger than themselves. The song was called Duérmete mi niño, a traditional Puerto Rican lullaby that spoke of angels watching over sleeping children and love that transcends all boundaries and protection that never fails. But this wasn't magic or supernatural intervention. This was something more powerful and more real. This was pure love and compassion, the kind that flows naturally from children who have learned empathy and kindness through their own experiences with pain and loss. Marcus swayed gently from side to side, his eyes closed in concentration as if he were channeling every peaceful moment his grandmother had ever given him, every night she had sung away his nightmares, every time her voice had made him feel safe and loved despite all the things that were wrong with the world. Emma's cries began to soften, almost immediately, her tiny body relaxing against Marcus's chest as if she recognized something familiar and comforting in his song, something that spoke to the universal language of love that all children understand instinctively. The businessman in the navy suit stopped his aggressive typing and looked up in amazement. The frustrated young mother turned in her seat to watch with wonder. Even the elderly couple, who had been so critical earlier, leaned forward to see what was happening. The flight attendants paused their service and gathered at a respectful distance, their professional demeanor giving way to genuine amazement at what they were witnessing. As Marcus continued singing, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse, something truly remarkable and unprecedented began to happen throughout the entire airplane cabin. Passengers who had been irritated, hostile, and judgmental just minutes before began to soften, their faces transforming as they witnessed this pure act of compassion between strangers. An elderly man in row 15 wiped tears from his weathered cheeks, suddenly remembering lullabies his own mother had sung to him more than 70 years ago during the Great Depression, when times were hard, but love was abundant and families took care of each other no matter what. A young couple traveling to Europe for their honeymoon squeezed each other's hands tightly, both thinking about the children they hoped to have someday and the kind of world they wanted to bring them into, a world where kindness mattered more than money and where people helped each other simply because it was the right thing to do. The businessman in the expensive suit slowly closed his laptop, his anger evaporating as he was suddenly reminded of his own 8-year-old daughter back home in Chicago. How she always asked him to sing to her at bedtime, even though he claimed he couldn't carry a tune. How her face lit up when he tried anyway, because she didn't care about his voice. She just cared that he was there with her. A teenage girl, traveling alone to visit her estranged father, found herself crying quietly, moved by the sight of this boy who was probably close to her own age, showing such maturity and compassion to a complete stranger. Marcus's song seemed to strip away all the artificial barriers that normally separated people on airplanes and in society. The barriers of class and race and economic status and social expectations, revealing the shared humanity that exists underneath all those surface differences. Emma had stopped crying completely now, her bright blue eyes wide and focused on Marcus's face, as if she understood on some instinctive level that this boy, this complete stranger, was offering her something precious and rare, something that couldn't be bought or commanded or demanded. Her tiny pink hand reached up and grasped his finger with surprising strength, and in that moment, everyone watching felt their hearts crack open just a little bit wider, felt something shift inside them that they couldn't quite name, but knew was important and real. Victoria stared at Marcus in absolute wonder and disbelief, watching her daughter completely calm and peaceful for the first time in hours. She had paid thousands of dollars to consult with the best pediatricians in Manhattan, had hired the most expensive and highly recommended nannies with decades of experience, had purchased every high-tech gadget and designer product designed to soothe crying babies, from Swedish-made sound machines to organic cotton swaddles that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Her nursery at home was filled with toys and mobiles and devices that promised to solve every possible baby-related problem, and she had read every parenting book written by experts with impressive credentials and multiple degrees. Yet this boy, who probably lived paycheck to paycheck in a neighborhood she had never visited, who wore second-hand clothes and carried his belongings in a backpack held together with safety pins, had accomplished what none of her money or resources or professional help could achieve. She found herself truly seeing Marcus for the first time, not just as a poor kid from economy class who didn't belong in her world, but as a wise and compassionate soul who understood something fundamental about human connection that all her business success had somehow failed to teach her. His grandmother, Sophia, had made her way carefully up the aisle, her arthritic joints making movement difficult, but her determination unstoppable, tears streaming down her weathered face as she watched her grandson share the love and wisdom she had given him with a stranger's child. She placed a gentle, trembling hand on Victoria's shoulder, and without speaking the same language fluently, without sharing the same cultural background or economic status or life experiences, the two women understood each other perfectly in that moment. They were both mothers, both protectors, both women who had felt the helpless terror of not being able to comfort a crying child, both human beings who recognized love when they saw it in its purest form. Sophia whispered in broken English that Marcus was a good boy, that he had learned to help others because others had helped him, that sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest hearts. The airplane cabin had been completely transformed into something sacred and extraordinary, a space where strangers had become witnesses to the profound truth that love recognizes no boundaries and compassion knows no limits. Marcus continued humming softly as Emma drifted toward peaceful sleep, her breathing finally steady and calm, her little body completely relaxed in his arms. Other passengers throughout the plane began to smile at each other for the first time during the flight. Conversations sparked between people who had been anonymous and isolated just minutes before. The businessman offered his premium phone charger to a struggling college student whose device had died hours earlier. The honeymoon couple shared their expensive first-class snacks with a family of 4 traveling in economy who were trying to make their limited food budget last the entire flight. The young mother, who had been critical and judgmental earlier, approached Victoria's seat and offered practical tips from her own parenting experience, her earlier harsh judgment completely replaced by genuine desire to help and support another mother in need. An off-duty nurse traveling in coach volunteered to check Emma's temperature and examine her to make sure there were no underlying medical issues causing the distress. A businessman from Texas struck up a conversation with an immigrant family, asking about their story and offering business contacts that might help the father find better employment. It was as if Marcus's simple act of compassion had reminded everyone aboard that airplane that they were all human beings sharing the same journey through life, all deserving of kindness and understanding and help when they needed it, regardless of their bank accounts or social status or country of origin or any other artificial division that society had created to separate people from each other. As the plane began its descent toward Miami International Airport, the pilot announcing their approach and reminding passengers to prepare for landing, Marcus very carefully and gently transferred the peacefully sleeping Emma back to her mother's arms. Victoria looked deep into his young eyes and saw something that would haunt her in the most beautiful way possible for the rest of her life. The kind of innate goodness and wisdom that couldn't be taught in schools or bought with money or achieved through success, only recognized and honored when it appeared naturally in the world. She asked his name in a voice hoarse with emotion, where he was traveling and why. What had made him want to help when everyone else had given up or turned away in annoyance. Marcus explained about his dying grandfather in San Juan, about the traditional songs his grandmother had sung to generations of children in their family, about how his mother used to tell him that helping others was the best way to heal your own broken heart and honor the love you had received from people who were no longer with you. His words were simple and unadorned, but carried the weight of lived experience, the kind of wisdom that comes only from loss and love, intertwined in ways that transform suffering into service. Victoria found herself sharing her own story with this remarkable child, telling him about the loneliness that came with success, about the fear of being an inadequate mother despite all her professional achievements, about how Emma's cries made her feel like she was failing at the most important job she had ever been given, more important than any company she had built or any deal she had closed. In those precious final minutes before landing, 2 people from completely different worlds discovered that they shared the same deepest fears and hopes, the same desire to protect and nurture and love, the same fundamental human need for connection and understanding. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway at Miami International, and as passengers began to gather their belongings and prepare to disembark in the usual chaos of arrival, something completely unprecedented and spontaneous happened that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Someone in the back of economy class began to clap, slow and rhythmic applause that started as a single person's appreciation, but spread throughout the cabin like a powerful wave of human connection and gratitude. It wasn't just for Marcus, though he had been the catalyst for everything that followed, the young boy who had shown them all what courage and compassion looked like in action. The applause was for the reminder that kindness still existed in a world that often seemed cruel and divided, that compassion could bridge any divide between people, that sometimes the most powerful and transformative moments happened when and where we least expected them to occur. It was applause for the recognition that they had all been part of something extraordinary, witnesses to the kind of moment that restored faith in humanity and reminded everyone present of what really mattered in life. Marcus blushed deeply and tried to hide behind his grandmother, overwhelmed by the attention and unsure why adults were making such a big deal about something that seemed perfectly natural to him. But Sophia squeezed his thin shoulder proudly, tears still streaming down her face as she watched hundreds of strangers honor her grandson for the kindness and wisdom she had tried to instill in him through years of patient love and guidance. Victoria stood on shaky legs and addressed the entire cabin, her voice strong despite the tears flowing freely down her cheeks. She thanked Marcus not just for calming Emma, but for reminding her and everyone else present that the most valuable things in life could not be purchased or achieved through ambition or accumulated through success. They could only be freely given from one heart to another and gratefully received by those wise enough to recognize their worth. She looked around at all the faces watching her, faces that had been hostile and angry hours earlier, but now showed warmth and connection and shared humanity, and realized that this flight had changed her as much as it had changed everyone else aboard, that she would never again be the same person who had boarded this plane in New York. As passengers slowly filed off the plane in the usual post-flight shuffle, Victoria made a decision that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives in ways none of them could have imagined. She asked Marcus and his grandmother to wait at the gate, pulling out her phone to cancel her connecting flight to an important board meeting in Los Angeles that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to what had just happened. Instead, without hesitation, she purchased 3 tickets to San Juan on the next available flight, explaining to Sophia in her limited Spanish and through gestures that she wanted to meet the grandfather who had helped raise such an extraordinary young man, that she wanted to honor the family that had created someone capable of such pure compassion. Sophia wept openly, her weathered hands shaking as she understood that this wealthy stranger was offering them something far more valuable than money, something that couldn't be bought or sold, but only shared between human beings who recognized each other's essential worth. She was offering genuine connection, authentic relationship, the gift of her presence and attention and care during what might be her husband's final days on Earth. Marcus was confused at first, his young mind struggling to understand why this rich lady wanted to come with them to Puerto Rico, why she would abandon her important business to spend time with people she barely knew. But his grandmother whispered to him in rapid Spanish that sometimes angels come in unexpected forms, wearing business suits instead of wings, carrying briefcases instead of harps, and that they must always be ready to recognize miracles when they appeared in their lives. Victoria wasn't trying to be an angel or a savior. She was simply trying to remember how to be human again, to reconnect with the parts of herself that had been buried under years of corporate success and social climbing, and the relentless pursuit of more money, more power, more recognition from people who didn't really matter. She had built a business empire worth billions of dollars, but realized that she had been building walls around her heart at the same time, walls that separated her from genuine human connection and the kind of joy that came from simple acts of love. Marcus had shown her how to tear down those walls, not through force or ambition or strategy, but through the gentle power of a song that came from the heart. The connection they forged on that airplane during those extraordinary hours became the foundation for a friendship that would span years and transform multiple lives in ways that none of them could have predicted or planned. Victoria established a scholarship fund in memory of Marcus's mother, Elena, ensuring that bright children from struggling families across the country could access educational opportunities that might otherwise remain forever out of reach, breaking cycles of poverty through the power of learning and hope. But more importantly than any financial contribution, she became part of their extended family in the truest sense, learning Spanish so she could communicate directly with Sophia and understand the stories and wisdom that had shaped Marcus into the remarkable person he was becoming. She visited Puerto Rico regularly over the following years, not as a tourist or a benefactor, but as a friend and adopted daughter who had found her way home to values and relationships that money could never buy. She was present during Abuelo's final weeks, holding Sophia's hand as they sat vigil beside his hospital bed, listening to him tell stories about his childhood and his dreams and his love for his family, understanding for the first time that true wealth was measured in memories and connections and the love that continued even after death. Marcus grew up knowing that his simple act of compassion on an airplane had created ripples that touched countless lives, but he never lost his humility or his natural instinct to help others whenever he saw someone in need. He eventually became a teacher who specialized in working with children from difficult circumstances, kids who felt invisible or forgotten or convinced that they didn't matter, showing them through his own example that every person had something valuable to offer the world, regardless of their background or circumstances. The story of what happened on Flight 447 that day spread far beyond the passengers who had witnessed it firsthand, though none of them ever forgot the experience or stopped being grateful that they had been present for such a profound moment of human connection. Videos were shared on social media, newspaper articles were written, television interviews were conducted, and the story was retold countless times, around dinner tables and in classrooms and in churches and anywhere people gathered to share examples of hope and kindness in action. But the real impact of that day wasn't found in the media coverage or the viral videos or the inspirational quotes that circulated online. The true transformation happened in the countless small acts of kindness that followed in the weeks and months and years afterward, inspired by the reminder that ordinary people had the power to create extraordinary moments simply by choosing compassion over indifference, understanding over judgment, connection over isolation. Victoria learned to parent with presence rather than presence, to value authenticity and emotional availability over achievement and material success. She discovered that Emma responded far better to lullabies and gentle touches than to expensive toys and designer clothes, that what her daughter needed most was not a perfect mother, but a present one, someone who was willing to be vulnerable and real and human. Emma grew up hearing the story of how a boy named Marcus had sung her to sleep on an airplane when she was just 6 months old, understanding from an early age that love came in many forms and often from unexpected sources, that the most important things in life couldn't be bought but had to be received as gifts from other people's hearts. She learned Spanish as she grew older so she could communicate with her honorary grandmother Sophia, who became one of the most important influences in her young life, teaching her traditional songs and stories and values that connected her to something larger than her privileged upbringing. And Marcus carried with him throughout his life the profound knowledge that his grandmother's wisdom, passed down through generations of strong women who had survived hardship and loss but never stopped believing in the power of love, had the ability to heal hearts and build bridges across any divide that society might create between people. Years later, when Marcus graduated from college on a full scholarship that Victoria had quietly arranged, when he gave the valedictorian speech about the importance of compassion in education, Sophia sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and weeping with pride as she watched her grandson receive recognition for academic achievements that had seemed impossible when they were struggling to pay rent in Queens. Victoria was there too, with teenage Emma beside her, both of them applauding as Marcus talked about how a simple song had changed his understanding of his own power to make a difference in the world. He spoke about his mother Eleanor, about his grandfather, who had lived to see him graduate high school despite the doctor's predictions, about his grandmother, who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities she had never had. But mostly, he spoke about the airplane flight that had taught him that kindness was not just a nice gesture, but a radical act that could transform not only the person receiving it, but the person giving it, and everyone who witnessed it happening. The scholarship program that Victoria had established in his mother's name had grown to help thousands of children across the country, But Marcus always remembered that it had started with a crying baby and a song that came from his grandmother's heart, passed through his voice, and somehow managed to touch the souls of strangers who needed to remember their own capacity for love. If this incredible true story has moved you the way it moved those passengers that day, if it has reminded you of the power we all possess to make a difference in someone else's life through simple acts of kindness and compassion, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories about the power of human connection and the miracles that happen when we choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair. Share your own experiences in the comments section below. Tell us about a time when you witnessed or experienced an unexpected act of kindness that changed your perspective on life or restored your faith in humanity. Have you ever been the person who offered comfort to a stranger in distress, or have you been the one who received help from someone you didn't expect to care? Sometimes the most profound and life-changing moments in our lives happen when we least expect them, when a stranger becomes an angel and a simple song becomes a symphony of hope that reminds us all of what it truly means to be human. Remember that we all have the power to be that person for someone else, to offer comfort in times of distress, to choose compassion over judgment, to reach across the artificial barriers that divide us and touch another person's life with kindness. In a world that often feels divided by differences in race, class, religion, politics, and social status, stories like Marcus and Victoria's remind us that love truly is the universal language that connects us all, that a 12-year-old boy from Queens and a billionaire CEO from Manhattan can find common ground in their shared humanity and create a friendship that transcends every boundary society tries to place between people. The next time you see someone struggling, someone in distress, someone who needs help but might not know how to ask for it, remember Marcus and his grandmother's lullaby. Remember Victoria and her desperate need for connection. Remember that sometimes the smallest gestures create the largest transformations, and that you never know when your moment to make a difference might arrive.